the topic is quite interesting, as you all know. Getting the fund for the projects is going to be a very challenging task for the last, I would say, 3 to 4 decades. We have been trying to crack this as easy as we could, but it has been always eluding that. They always say there is good number of projects, there is always good number of financing options available, but they don't meet quite often. I think that is the reason why we see that financing has been always a grand challenge, not only in India, but across the globe. So by the way of introduction, I'm Dinesh. I'm the Executive Director at Ernst & Young, taking care of the renewable energy projects under the government procurement services, and also looking after the climate change and sustainability and assurance services as well. So today we have a wonderful panel, as you could see, and I see Ritu was moderating the previous session. She should have been the moderator for this session too, but anyway, she was quite happy to give it up to me. Thanks Ritu. I don't know how many sessions you have more during the day. This is the last one? Okay, good. Just to give you a kind of a quick intro into the subject, as you could see, the target for India in terms of the 2030, which is the immediate target the government has set, and then you talk about energy independence by 2047, and then the net zero by 2070. So we all know how kind of the kind of government's intention to move towards a net zero is very clear. And the missing puzzle, as we all know, again, is the financing aspect of it. The numbers are in front of you. Several estimates have come up. For 2070, they say it is $100 trillion we need. That one of the estimates said that. And then we just heard last week from one of the think tanks that just for the just transition alone, you need $1 trillion, out of which 40% should come from the grants from the government, and then 60% from the private sector. And for this year, I think the Honorable Minister for Power said that we are expecting $25 to $30 billion. So we have definitely moved in terms of billions to trillions of dollars in terms of what we need, only from the Indian perspective. So given this scenario, we have to really crack in terms of the aspect of how the construction finance risking is going to really rule the whole process of it, because the financing post-construction becomes a bit easy. I'm not saying it is absolutely easy. In terms of the number of instruments that we are designing, that also has grown into a different level, actually. We're talking about guarantee instruments, for which we have panelists today to speak about it. So we have a plethora of financing instruments already available, but the kind of uptake and the kind of implementation of it, and then having a successful business story to tell to the investment community so that India can become the destination for the clean energy investment, is still work in progress. I'm not saying we have not achieved much. We have achieved tremendous kind of milestones, again thanks to Invest India as well. So we have a wonderful platform set already, and we are ready to take off in terms of going to the next $1 trillion targets. I think that is where we have to set ourselves. We have to really be ambitious. When 175 gigawatt was set, I think many people laughed at the ambitious goal which we had set for ourselves, and look where we are. But it is not just installation in gigawatts. Ritu will agree with me. We talk about kilowatt hour, not just megawatts. So the same thing goes for the dollars in investment. It is not the capacity investment dollars we are talking. We are talking about the dollars that will lead to performing kilowatt hour every day, every hour, and every second. I think that is where we have to set the tone of today's discussion in terms of having an excellent mix of the representing the government and the international aspect of it, the multilateral bank and the developers. And also, very interestingly, Ritu has taken a very new position. I hope the previous audience who have been here would know that transformation she has made. Is a big surprise for me. Not a shock, but it's a surprise. So we could hear from her also her previous experience, and also from the current angle, how she is looking into the skilling aspect of the professionals in the financial field. So just to set the tone again, this will be more towards understanding the, I would say, the missing puzzle of how the missing pieces of the puzzle in terms of how the best practices could come together. You have excellent panel to share that knowledge. So without much ado, I would like to pick Abhinav from World Bank. So he's the energy consultant from the World Bank. Abhinav and I, for the last 4 to 5 years, have been working to crack the financing of rooftop solar. So he's not a new face to me at all, and the same, I believe, for him. Abhinav, it will be great to hear from you in terms of the kind of legacy, I would say, that we are already claiming, for the rooftop solar financing for the C&I segment, and now you are venturing into residential. How did you crack that puzzle with SBI? And in terms of your approach, it was not just a financing concessional line of credit, but it was a combination of structuring and involving the players to understand how to create the enabling ecosystem, the technical assistance, and the business models that you worked with the government, with the international experience as well. How did you crack that, and how you believe that that would help set the tone for similar concessional line of credits in general for renewable energy? That's number one. And of course, in terms of the upcoming technologies, you need a huge kind of a requirement of financing. So do you think the kind of that kind of a World Bank, Indian domestic banks, including the private sector banks initiative, should then unlock that kind of a capital? So it will be great to hear from you on those.
Okay, thanks Dinesh. So I would start just by building upon before coming directly to answer the question which Dinesh you posed. So just to give you some more specific facts and figures. So in 2019-20, the overall requirement of financing in the, not just in the clean energy, but broadly energy that expands beyond renewables to energy efficiency and also transportation. So the need was around $150-160 billion in India, and what we could finally, like mobilize, or what was finally kind of invested was close to around $40 billion. So we are roughly talking about meeting 1/4 of the requirement, broadly as a ballpark. But of course, as Dinesh mentioned, going forward until 2040, 2050, overall the requirement is close to trillions of dollars. So now, given this gap, what is the role of the World Bank? So now I would try to explain this through the rooftop solar example, where Dinesh and I work together. So in 2016, the World Bank, together with State Bank of India, launched a $650 million program to kind of support uptake of rooftop solar by commercial and industrial consumers in India. And to put this figure in perspective, roughly the figure I mentioned, about $40 billion, World Bank lends around $1 billion in India per year in energy of the $4 billion envelope. So you could see that, like the World Bank as one of the multilateral is, is taking a very small pie in the overall, like actual financing and the need of the financing. But then the issue or this gap is largely because of real risks and perceived risks, I would say. And the program which I am mentioning right now about the solar rooftop, the risks were real in 2016, where there were gaps in terms of the institutional capacities to, like kind of evaluate the proposals which would come, the institutional capacity of the distribution utilities, the institutional capacities of the installers. So there were, like capacity gaps. There were gaps in terms of policy and regulatory, enabling and policy and regulatory environment. There were gaps around the awareness of consumers for these new technologies. So there were gaps on similar areas. And that's where World Bank, together with Ministry of New and Renewable Energy and State Bank of India, launched a concessional line of credit along with the technical assistance program. So basically the technical assistance program, which was led by Ernst & Young and Dinesh particularly, along with a consortium of other organizations, helped addressing these barriers which I just mentioned. And then the concessional financing kind of dovetailed as and when, like these barriers were getting addressed, while there was a very strong commercial case for commercial industrial consumers to adopt rooftop solar. So this is an example where, like how a multilateral working with the government and the public sector and along with the private sector developers kind of kick-started a market. And that brings me to the point, the first question which Dinesh you asked. So wherever the technologies are still nascent and there are market barriers, perhaps the approach would be to bring in the concessional lines or concessional financing to bring down the cost of capital, but also to address the fundamental market barriers in place. But then now in the last 6 years, we are now about to launch a credit guarantee mechanism. As you mentioned that, building this gap of financing or bridging this gap just through concessional financing will not be possible, because we need to really think about how we could enable private sector to play a much bigger role in financing. And that's where now we are working with CGTMSE. It's a credit guarantee trust fund for micro and small enterprises. World Bank, along with Ministry of MSME and MNRE, is about to launch a program which would largely provide partial credit guarantees to the banks, which would be financing rooftop solar projects installed by MSMEs. So the idea is to cover up to 50% of the risk which the banks would be taking, and in the process nudging them to lend to the sector. So this is a typical guarantee instrument of IBRD. IBRD is like World Bank, International Bank for Reconstruction and Development. So that's one way where we see that the risks are perceived and not real. So to address these perceived risks, a better instrument is credit guarantee. And we see that there would be different forms which credit guarantee broadly in terms of credit enhancement could take place, like subordinate debt and others. And I feel that that's the way forward, at least for MDBs, where we could play a role in kind of mobilizing private capital for the technologies which are established, where there are perceived risks, not real risks. And for the real risk, we kind of work with the industry players and sector actors to address the fundamental barriers to concessional financing and technical assistance. I will stop here. Back to you.
Great. Thanks so much, Abhinav, because it's not only the concessional line of credit, but also the instruments that could unlock new capital, the guarantee facility. I think for the first time, it is going to be launched in India for leveraging the rooftop solar financing. Anyway, best wishes for that, Abhinav. Now I'll move to the Indian scenario, and nobody would miss even a wink in terms of understanding the kind of success that Invest India has brought into the sector, especially clean. Of course, they have done a lot of other work. They have played a lead catalytic role across the segments in the country. And our focus today is on renewable energy. So we have seen the kind of platform and the kind of facilitation services and the kind of engagement strategies that Invest India has deployed over the last few years in bringing the renewable energy financing to the core. So from that angle, my next speaker would be Chandrima Sinha from Invest India. She is the Vice President there. And I would like to basically ask her in terms of how the kind of the engagement strategy and the business models and any success stories in terms of leading the facilitation services for making more or scaling the investments in the renewable energy in the country have worked. If she can share her experience. And then also the second question is about the green hydrogen. Is there anything that you're working exclusively on the green hydrogen part of it? And therefore, what could be the roadmap of how you would be able to carry forward this in terms of your services to scale the investments in the clean energy in the country? Chandrima.
Thank you, Dinesh, and good morning to everyone. So that was a very generous introduction, but as Dinesh pointed out, Invest India has played the role of the National Investment Promotion and Facilitation Agency, and as such we support the government in all arms of the government. So to give context, when in 2010 our target was just 10 gigawatts, and in 2015, probably the year we all started at Invest India, the target went to an ambitious 175 gigawatts, and that is what we started with, to ensure that everybody knew the ambitious targets that the government had set across all different kinds of renewable energy, wind, solar, hydro. And our first task was to spread the news that there is a very amenable policy environment that is taking place in India, and all manufacturers and all investors are very much welcome. And along with that, as the facilitation agency, our aim was to ensure that all investors had the smoothest journey possible during the investment cycle in India. And one example I'll give is a European wind blade manufacturer who saw that their plant from start to finish was set up in a record time of 15 months as compared to 18 months that China took. And that ensured that they actually went on to do many more investments in India, and they are fairly established in India. So that is one side. Then going forward, there have been many other schemes that we have been supporting time and again, creating a platform for investors to share their feedback with the government. Through the project development cell, we work very closely with MNRE and the Ministry of Power, where we work with them to help build new schemes that can bring in investments. And one of the key highlights has been the solar PLI, PLI 1 and PLI 2, which was, PLI 2 was announced yesterday. And we worked with the ministry to spread the message, understand what were the issues and concerns. Those were also built into the scheme. And not only spreading the message about what the policy and guidelines were, but also hand-holding the manufacturers to ensure that they could submit their bids in a timely fashion. And that ensured the maximum possible participation of the manufacturers. Another interesting example of engagement I would like to talk about, that Invest India is also managing the Startup India ecosystem. And since 2014, more than 3,000 startups have been recognized under this scheme, which were in the sustainability space. And about 42 billion have just come in for about 300 odd clean tech companies. These are at very nascent stage, but they're coming up with very innovative technologies that are now being adopted not just by the global investors but also domestic investors, and that is also leading to larger financing coming in. Plus, we also have a very active financial institutional investor engagement where since 2015 we have engaged with the sovereign wealth funds, the PE funds, the pension funds, and also talked about the different kind of investment opportunities that India presents. And that has translated to many mega deals, and I think we are all aware of the companies who have attracted partnership with these institutional investors, and that again has also been boosted by this, the schemes announced in the budget, where SWFs and PE investments into the infrastructure phase has been given tax benefits, and even the overall FDI schemes have come in through the 100% approval route. So all this has boosted the ecosystem, and it has been Invest India's role to spread the message. And regarding the second question about the green hydrogen, again we are very actively engaged with the ministry and the investor community, taking in the feedback, helping now draft the framework and operationalize the national hydrogen mission. So our team is very working actively. We have different teams. We have the energy team. We now also have a ESG sustainability team. And one more important aspect I'll just quickly mention is that we're very much guiding the state governments on also their green policies, because as you can see, our policy environment has been given a boost not just at the central level, where we do have a very dynamic ecosystem with MNRE, SECI, IDA, everyone, but also state governments are also now competing with each other. You know, we have different state governments announcing tax benefits. Jharkhand announced last year, then Goa has just come up with a very liberal open access policy. So that also our teams are engaged with, and we hope that this will lead to us achieving our 2047 targets very soon. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Chandrima. That is quite encouraging in terms of, it's not just talking but walking the talk. I think that is the mantra of Invest India, and I believe that the platform that they are now establishing across the spectrum of renewable energy would help each other to have the experience in terms of how to raise finance in a particular sector, a well-established sector versus a new sector like green hydrogen. I think the cross kind of sectoral experience would also help in preparing the players, and especially the PLI 1 and 2, as you said. The PLI 1 for hydrogen is going to come very soon. So definitely your experience would help that sector as well to set the things right. Yeah, thank you so much. Now I'll move to the international scenario. We have Alexander, private sector specialist from International Solar Alliance. So Alex, as we all know, the kind of mission of ISA to unlock $1 trillion investment for the solar by 2030 for the member countries, if not for the globe. And also we know the kind of enabling ecosystem that you are striving now to establish across the member countries, and again, if not the globe as well. And in terms of how you can kind of share the experience that we have gained so far in terms of this enabling ecosystem. It could be policy, regulation, skill building, etc. But core theme is financing, because you're targeting the affordable financing in a very big way. We see all your initiatives getting more traction, not only from the non-suspect institutions, but also from the philanthropy financing institutions as well. And therefore it is going to be really a interesting journey that ISA is going to lead us in the coming decades. And also a follow-up question is on how the kind of sharing of experience within India, of course, because within India you have so many challenges from state to state, but also carrying forward the experience as an exchange between India and your member countries and from other countries to India. What will be the kind of key elements that you could share with us? Over to you, Alex.
Thanks so much. Yeah, no, I think ISA, as a South-South institution, which is really trying to help developing countries learn from the best, I think India certainly has a lot to teach. A great example of this is SECI. And you look at the role SECI has done in kind of mitigating the offtake risk. I've been in calls with Nigeria where they said, we need a SECI, we wish we had a SECI. And I think this is the kind of institution that would really support developing countries in kind of reducing some of these payment risks and offtake risks. Abhinav was just talking about concessional financing. And it was great to hear that concessional financing for MSMEs, because I think this is one of the challenges with the first program, is that it went kind of to the larger CNI segments, right? And I think this is something similar we're seeing in a lot of countries in Africa and Latin America, where where it's needed most is exactly where the private sector is not willing to step in. And so similar to what Abhinav was talking about, we're looking at kind of first loss guarantee structures. We're looking at blended structures. We're looking at risk mitigation insurance, so that we can make, crowd in that private sector investment and draw on this private sector to those segments. I think, another example, we're actually working with Invest India. They've done a fantastic job kind of positioning India as a promotion destination, whether it's, the ease of doing business here. So as you know, ISA publishes Ease of Doing Solar, which is, to try and help countries kind of improve their systems of laws and regulations, an ecosystem toward promoting solar. We're working with Invest India directly on a program for startups, so trying to help. It's called the Solar X Grand Challenge, and specifically targeting startups in Africa in the solar segment. And again, the idea here is to provide a little bit of financial support, but also kind of that mentorship and connections and kind of that broader ecosystem support that we're kind of lucky to enjoy here in India. And so I think, these things all kind of work together, and as, Abhinav mentioned as well, this enabling environment, right? To get financing, you need to have credible off-takers. To get financing, you need to have, good products and good companies. To get finance, and so, we're working with NTPC to help structure projects and structure tenders in a way that are internationally bankable. So yes, financing is certainly a piece, but I kind of always like to say, if you get all the other pieces right, the financing will come. The private sector is willing to come if the laws are good and if the tenders are well designed and if the ease of doing business is there, then the financing will come.
Thanks. And just have a follow-up question on the kind of experiences that you feel that you can exchange between India and your member countries and vice versa. Do you like to touch upon that as well?
Yeah. So I think SECI was the best example, but I think also in structuring tenders, for example, how do you design a PPA that's bankable, whether it's having guarantees in place, whether it's allocating the risk between the developer and the off-taker. And so this is something we're working closely with countries, how to design that. On the mini-grid side, there's leaders like OMC Power and Husk Power and Tata Power, which are leaders in kind of the mini-grid space in India. And ironically, because India's now getting to a point where it's mostly electrified, there's less of a need for mini-grids in India. And so now these companies are aggressively looking at overseas markets, and especially in remote areas, so more than 15 kilometers away from the grid connection, it makes sense to use mini grids. So now we're taking companies like OMC, for example, which it's not just a technical solution, but it's also the financing solution. It's also the payment solution. How do you get compensation from the government, and how do you get small MSMEs to pay? How do you get local people with limited credit? Something World Bank again really struggles with, right? How do you get people who are unbanked and who don't have a AAA credit rating? How do you make sure that they can access solar as well? So I'm not saying we're there yet, but I think there's certainly a lot of lessons from the India experience that we're trying to apply in developing Africa and Latin America.
Excellent, thank you, Alex. So I would definitely request you to watch the kind of journey that ISI is going to lead us into, because it's a very interesting space. By the sheer number of member countries, which with so much of experience in the breadth and the width of the country across the continents, I think there'll be a lot of examples coming up, and not only the kind of experience that he mentioned, but there'll be many such experiences for India to learn as well as India to share. And also another area which I may have a follow-up question later to him is on the skilling aspect. They're doing tremendous activity in building capacities and doing a lot of training programs as well across the member countries. But moving on to the private sector, I think I would like to engage with Harvinder Singh, who's the head project finance in Amplus, and now he gave a quick update before the meeting about merging with Gentar, which is going to be the platform for Petronas for investing in a very focused manner in renewables. Harvinder, my questions to you are basically how you see the role of financing from the RESCO's point of view for the MSMEs in the rooftop solar. Of course, Abhinav mentioned about the credit guarantee, but from your experience, how you think that could be used to leverage financing for solarizing the MSME. So that's the first part. And second, of course, in terms of the green open access kind of regulation, and also opening up of the market due to that, how you feel is your investment strategy for scaling up solar in the country would change, and therefore what kind of financing instruments or the best practice that you're looking forward to?
Sure. Thanks, Dinesh. Thanks for asking the question. So, first of all, like MSME as a sector, we all know is a critical part of Indian economy. Today, around approximately 40% of our industrial output is from MSME, and their power cost is around 10-20% of their total cost is from power. So, if the time today we want MSME to be more competitive, and we want them to have a least cost of production, then power is low cost of power is what is required. So, if the MSME need cheaper green power, it's like the time is now. We have seen the transition. Earlier when we seen the FIT regime, we have seen the FIT tariffs, and we see that bidding. Then we see when rooftop was a concept only, but now we have seen rooftop grown like an important segment, and all the large corporates, mid corporates have been tapped. So this is a segment which is still untapped, and we have seen growth in this sector mainly through a capex mode. But now as a RESCO, we are very excited. We are excited about this sector, and good to hear from World Bank that soon they are giving a partial guarantee scheme, which will definitely support financing in the sector. But still, this is one part of the puzzle. The other critical part is how to. So this partial guarantee scheme is only able to reduce the perceived risk. What is more important from a lender perspective or from a developer perspective is to bring more technology into this space. So we have been talking about a lot of fintech companies coming into this sector, and we are seeing how the channel financing or trade financing is getting easier. So we need to bring that methodologies into a rooftop financing also. So when the technology will help us to assess the credibility of a SME player. So the partial guarantee is just a part of thing, but we ultimately the bankers, the lender, have to see the bankability of the project. So if they are able to assess the creditworthiness of the off-taker through a technology-enabled solution, they will be more comfortable. So this is one thing that we can see, one approach which the lenders can see. Other thing is that, so maybe partial guarantees, the World Bank is supporting a one lender, but we need more such lenders, more such development institution coming into picture where not only the government sector lenders are supported, but the private NBFCs, which being that key lender to this sector. Initially, when you see when the renewable wind or solar projects are coming, only the private sector have come up and finance those projects. So we need more such products, partial guarantee schemes or some risk mitigation scheme to support not only the PSU or government sector lenders, but also private sector players like smaller NBFCs or even the larger NBFCs. So this is a play where I feel MSME can make a difference. It would be easier if we able to source good financing for MSME at a good cost. Because if the cost is higher, then also it will pass on to tariff, which will again increase the power cost for the SME. So the cost of the funding is also very important here. And also the one other thing that what can be done on the part of the RBI is just to right now there is a limit of 30 crore financing for which is if you are financing up to 30 crore, it's qualified as a PSL. Sometimes you finance such projects as a portfolio of assets and you breach that 30 crore limit, so that 30 crore can be increased, and financing of projects which are targeted to MSME can be included in a PSL. So this will help also banks to reduce cost to some extent. So these are the few things that we can be done to have a better financing for a rooftop MSMEs. Now to the second question, where with the green open access. So this sector is coming up like really well, and the activity we have seen in last year or so for the open access, you can see the policies which has come up and to support the open access in a great way. So you will now see, we have seen ISTS waivers, we have seen hybrid policies, because ultimately if you want open access to succeed, you have to give some sort of RTC solutions. Just only a solar, which is an intermediate supply, you cannot solve the problem completely. You need to couple it with a wind or a battery or a pump storage. So we have seen policies coming which is supporting this open access, green energy open access transition. And from the financing perspective, as Alex rightly pointed out, the projects are good, financing will come. So we have Indian developers have, you can say, beautifully explored the green bond market globally. And when the market was maturing in India, so we have seen few green bond placements in India. When the market was maturing, unfortunately, we have this one of the worst interest rate fluctuation or the adverse movement in the past decade. So this has slowed down the Indian green bond market. But there is the appetite. We all know the developer appreciate, the lender appreciate that this period is a small phase, is a small bet phase in the interest rate cycle. We'll soon see the cycle will go down, and then probably we'll again see more movement in the INR bond market. Other possible financing tool which we have seen is the InvITs. So we, as India, we've been a bit delayed in exploring InvITs, but we started in around 2017-16 when we have launched the REIT and InvIT. And after that, in last 4-5 years, we have seen a good traction there, and around 25 billion of capital under management, which is for a policymaker in a 4-5 years is a very decent number. The good initiative, and we'll see. Right now, we have seen only a couple of renewable InvITs, but it's a very good product. It's a yield co cyber structure, and the regulations are very good in India. There's a cap on the leverage. There's a definite payout. All these things have supported, and plus the corporate governance and the disclosures are as good as you can see for a listed company. So all these have supported this InvIT, and you will see more renewable InvIT coming in future. So this is my take. With this, I will leave the floor to you.
Thank you so much, Harvinder. I think the takeaway regarding InvITs and green bonds is worth considering as such, because we are still trying to reach the peak of utilizing the benefits of these two instruments. And also, as you said, in terms of the MSMEs, the bankability, irrespective of the guarantee, the bankability has to stand tall, right? In order to even to make that investment decision using the facility. I think these are very valid points. But one aspect in terms of how, if I ask you, like which has worked good for you, in the sense which has given the best returns in terms of the business model that so far Amplus has invested.
So Dinesh, you know, we are one of the largest distribution company. So and we are one of the company which is active in B2B space. unlike other large players which are also have a B2G part of the business. So what clicks for us is that the rooftop solar, if you say, although it's a very high cost business and a very low return business in a way, but that will give you an inroad to the customers. That will give you a start. So now this is like, if you see, we can, as you see the energy transition happening. So there are multiple products now for renewable energy company like us. So we have a rooftop, we have open access. Tomorrow we will also think of going distributed hydrogen or energy efficiency. So this, so you can say that what works for us is definitely the way the company is incorporated to start with a rooftop, have a foot into the customer's door and start selling the different products like open access, and also the way the focus, the policies, how the policies have molded over the last 10 years. We have seen a lot of traction and a lot of like net metering policies coming up, open access regime, the concessional open access charge. So the government is very focused on supporting green energy, and this has helped for the sector, not only Amplus, other players also to grow. And also if you see like last 10-12 years, the renewable energy sector have seen all the times, tough times also. But if you from the lender perspective, there is no default practically, or the defaults are very less. So the developers have shown, they have proven it, the risk of this sector is reducing. So it's a mix of policy, the understanding of the sector which developers are showing, and the commitment of the developers towards the sector, which is helpful.
Thanks. That's a very interesting answer from your end. Thanks again, Harvinder. Now, for the first time, I'm making Ritu speak last, but you have the last word. So as I was mentioning, Ritu has taken a new position now from Amplus to Amrop, right?
Moving down the directory.
Yeah, so definitely you have a huge background in terms of experiencing the challenges in raising finance in your previous avatar, and how your kind of efforts in creating that ecosystem, as we all discussing, how it has helped, and how you feel that would take India forward in terms of financing. So that is the first question. And because of your current position, I'm forced to ask you one question on the skilling aspect of the financing professions, because in India, we see the largest chunk of investments happening in India are through domestic financing even today. So in terms of how you see the kind of skilling aspect put on front, not just recruiting, but also enabling them to become a best professional in the field of finance. So what are the views on that? So over to you.
So first off, it's not the challenges of policy that made me run away from the sector. Okay. So I've thoroughly enjoyed, and I continue to be a part of the renewable sector, because what I'm looking at even in the executive search area is energy and infrastructure primarily. And these are growing spaces. So irrespective of what is happening on the growth front, or whether there is recession or not, infrastructure investment is not a choice. Neither is investment in energy transition. So these are going to happen because these are the building blocks of the future economy. Right. The question is, of course, depending on how optimistic the economic scenario is, who funds these investments. Right. So infrastructure development, and energy is a huge part of it, is going to happen. How much of that is going to come from aid? How much of that is going to come from multilateral agencies? How much of that is going to come from the private sector? What percentage is going to be FDI? How much are domestic investors going to put in? What confidence do people have? So the composition of the finance may change, right? So that is one interesting aspect. I think from a skilling perspective, I think I need to move one level higher to how we look at finance. When we looked at, and I'll take the example of my previous experience, we brought in PPAs in the private sector. From the utility scale, now you're down to a 100 kilowatt scale, right? That itself was an innovation. Unfortunately, the financing industry has not decentralized in that same manner. I am not suggesting you look away from asset quality, design, credit issues or any of those issues which are important before you decide to fund something. But if you're going to have the same, measure for something which is sub 1 megawatt, which is the case with most rooftops, as you're going to have for something which is multiple megawatts or close to a gigawatt, it's designed to fail. Because the amount of effort that you're putting in is almost the same, and the payout is what, 1,000th or 100th of that scale. So perhaps a change needs to be brought in terms of how we are going to evaluate assets for financing on the rooftop model. Does that mean we also go into, if I'm a lender, I also go into a distributed way, which means I tap into now a space of perhaps independent consultants who are reliable, who multiple agencies can use. I could be a state bank, I could be a World Bank, I could be an NBFC, right? And there are these entities which are distributed across the country, which I can rely on to give me quality reports. Right? This will also help people who are looking at acquisitions. This will also help companies like Amplus if I am trying to buy out somebody's portfolio, right? So a different approach to finance needs to come. We cannot have the same approach that we have for large scale and expect it to work in the small scale. Which is why large scale you are getting finance. Where is Amplus getting finance? You're getting finance for open access projects. Again, a large scale exercise. But that itself has been something which is more recent. The entire decentralized rooftop structure today is lacking finance. You could turn around and say in the residential segment, I buy a phone worth 1 lakh. I don't need financing for a rooftop system worth 1 lakh rupees. But that may or may not work, right? Even if I'm buying a phone today, how many of us are buying phones on EMIs, right? We are buying cars on EMIs. And there are some companies who actually are now looking at, the companies who specialize in rooftop systems, who look at again an EMI kind of a system for their clients. So these kind of innovations, they're not really, okay, it's too small for me to call them an innovation, but in one way, it is an innovation. It's bringing in the learnings from one sector into another and looking at ways that will make it work. And, when you start, there is obviously going to be challenges, and then 2 or 3, 5 years down the line, you figure out, okay, how do I tweak it further? How do I make it more fail-safe? How do I make it fairer? Right? How do I make it work? And the other question which has always plagued financing, it's long-term for the finance industry versus long-term for, say, the solar industry, where the life of an asset is 25 to 30 years. Right? You can repossess a car. It is very difficult to repossess a solar plant. So these kind of challenges, those that come in. But a lot of work is being done. I know the World Bank is doing a lot of work. I know you are doing a lot of work. We've had discussions on it. And we're looking at, say, for example, credit guarantees. But if that credit guarantee is limited to the first 3 years, it's not really de-risking the project for the developer. So I don't know what has to be done, but obviously we're going to have to look at it from a completely different lens to make it work. This is not an Indian problem alone. Our net zero is nearly 50 years away. Maldives is looking at net zero in 2030, right? But that 2030 has an asterisk. And that asterisk is provided they are able to get finance. It's an existential threat to that island country. But again, it's so hinging on finance. And again, it's going to be a combination of distributed assets, right? Which is going to make it work for that country. So this is not an Indian problem alone. Most of the ISR member countries will have similar situations. They might be even, in terms of accessibility, especially the Pacific countries, Kiribati, Vanuatu, they have even more challenges. And it is all going to be the distributed model. It is not going to work without financing. So how is it that we're going to make it work? Even in my current role, what we're looking at is skilling of this sector. The kind of leadership that you're going to provide them. When I keep talking about this change in thinking, there is transformation, which is a very, very abused word. Everything is a transformation, digital transformation, operational transformation. but it is going to require transformational thinking. You know, so far, even the largest of renewable companies have had a very operational way of working, right? This is how, you know, there's a cookie cutter approach to how project works, how project financing works, how you set up even large scale wind or large scale solar. But when you look to customize, when you look to give round the clock renewable or green solutions, you're going to adopt a different mindset. Right from the leadership of organizations which provide these services. So it's a very interesting space. It's a very, it's full of a series of challenges and opportunities. You know, because very often the solutions that we found are by slightly different thinking. It's not always by an entirely new invention.
As usual, very practical views and suggestions and sharing of your experience. And again, we had a very interesting session on just transition last week. Abhinav also was on the audience. We both were sitting the whole day and listening to various views. And everybody was talking only about finance, and they said G20 is going to be financing 20, you know. Everybody is going to talk only about financing and nothing else. And there is no doubt about it because of the kind of distributed in nature. I think Ritu touched it very nicely. We talk about distributed renewable energy, but we are not talking about distributed financing ability or the expertise. I think that's the crux of making small is beautiful is easy to say, but making it work, I think that is where we have to really put our heart out and then try to see how we can achieve it. But now I feel that we have heard from different experts on the panel. Maybe time to open up for some interesting questions if you have. No comments, but it will be great if you ask questions so that the panel could respond to you. Please introduce yourself and ask your question.
Hello, I am Sunil Kumar Shande from Mumbai and Sholapur. Here my query is the available global policies for funding, which concentrate more on the reducing carbon footprint and saving of environment, and secondary or very lowest priority set for the return on investment. I would like to know these global policies available here, and with these policies we can also achieve our zero footprint at the earliest.
So the question is more around the global policies which are
Giving more emphasis on the global.
Yeah, I would like to know the global policies available for funding which concentrate more on the environment saving and reducing the carbon footprint, and secondary or lowest priority set for the return on investment.
So on the global policy, I would say that the whole idea, you know, like I can talk about World Bank for instance, so wherein, you know, like the climate negotiations which take place and the imperative around climate change drives the, you know, like because World Bank shareholders and who funds World Bank sets this criteria wherein, you know, like for instance now starting 1st of July all our programs which will go to board should be Paris aligned, right? So whatever, so globally World Bank is financing around say $80-85 billion a year, and that is aligned with the Paris Agreement. So, you know, like that all of the funds should have some element of mitigating or adapting to climate change. So I would say that that's one, you know, like way to channel the funds. So wherein, you know, like the developed nations, for instance, are routing through the MDBs. There is also this platform of Green Climate Fund GCF. But of course, there is a debate around, you know, like what should be the level of funding which ideally should flow into these entities and what is really being financed. But besides that, I would say the whole idea of green bond, ESG, these all are not just Indian concept, but these are like driven by, you know, like global narrative around or global imperative around climate change. And then on the second question related to return on investments, so see, it depends on, you know, like entity who are investing. So for instance, for entities who are investing in World Bank or on lending to World Bank, their expectation would be much lower because that's like, but then similarly for the institutional investors, so the return on capital is more linked to who's bringing the capital and what's their intent. So it could range from few basis points to, for a private entity, it could run into a much higher rate.
The answer to your question is that the financing, yes, do emphasize on the climate financing. Your answer is right. But having said that, World Bank is not just throwing away the money. They also have a criteria in terms of the returns on investments that has to be ensured not only from the World Bank perspective, but also from the local regulator perspective. They can't go anything less than that. So I believe there is a balance, but maybe you find more hype in terms of climate financing is thrown open in the global media, but less about the returns on investment that is happening through that investment. Is any other question, please? Yeah. Any more? Yes, please.
Hello. Hello.
We can hear you, ma'am.
This is really a very important matter.
Ma'am, can you introduce yourself if you don't mind?
I am former economic advisor to India, Chandrima. It's a very important subject that we have been discussing. Can you hear me?
No, close. A bit close.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. I am Purnima Gupta, former economic advisor, Government of India. I have retired from Ministry of Power. Very important subject we have been discussing, and I have been listening very keenly to everything that you said. Now, what comes to my mind is the climate fund, the Green Climate Fund or the Green Energy Fund. $1 billion, wasn't it? $1 billion. Why haven't we been able to mobilize that fund? I mean, the subject is so important and it's been going on for years now, 20 years, 30 years. Everybody knows the importance of the subject. And so many passionate speakers are just adding their voice to the problem. But why haven't we been able to get that kind of fund? Why is there so much of bickering going on? Of course, today what you're talking about is, more specific. But this matter has been going for ages. Why don't we do something? I mean, this panel, is it not able to contribute to that debate as well? Can you please contribute to that debate? If you think it's so important, $1 billion.
Yeah, and that's a $1 billion question, I know that.
Yes, thank you so much.
Maybe I'll put Alex on the spot. In terms of the global challenge, we all know that is a $100 billion challenge, not a $1 billion. It's a $1 billion question. But more importantly, as you know, what she's asking is about the challenge of meeting the $100 billion.
Yeah. No, I think the biggest one is, a lot of it is strings attached. And I gave the example, I was talking earlier, when I was at IFC, we effectively couldn't fund solar projects in India because our environmental impact assessment process was 12 to 18 months, and the Indian government, to have a PPA, you need to get your project done in 6 to 12 months. So we basically could not fund solar projects directly in India. We could do it indirectly, but we couldn't do it directly. And I think this is something, you look at GCF, for example, you have a similar challenge. It takes 3 to 4 years to get money from GCF to comply with the environmental requirements and to comply with the social requirements and the governance aspects of this and that. So I think this is, India's, I think, rightfully brought up the issue of MDB reform. I really hope to see that go ahead. And this is something I hope to see more money that's targeted toward climate with, I guess, I don't say no strings attached, but let's say less strings attached. Because I think this is the biggest reason, when I talk to international donors, for them to give money, they need to have these checklists that have been established, and it takes 2 to 3 to 4 years. And the only companies that can comply with these checklists are those with armies of lawyers and accountants to be able to to comply with them. And this is where I really appreciate India's leadership. For example, in solar and wind, there's kind of an accelerated EIA process. And I think that's a huge step that really differentiates it from, say, North America or Europe, where it takes 3 to 4 years to build these projects. And I really hope, as other countries develop, they follow the Indian model rather than the European or North American model.
Thank you. Yeah, I think the time is up. But just to conclude, before we close the panel, maybe if each one of you like to say a couple of priority items in terms of financing, because that could basically give a lot of takeaway for the audience. If each one of you have to pick up maybe one or even two, maybe 5 seconds each to give your priority to scale the finance the way India needs and even the world needs. Start from Chandrima.
I think Harvinder spoke about the InvIT. So there are new innovative financing options that are coming in, and also for us to meet our renewable energy targets, we also need to do a lot more tenders and bidding. And there is new forms of hybrid tenders that SECI and others are looking at, and we have to increase even the pipeline for opportunities for investors to come in. And most of it is, so far the 175 gigawatts have been implemented in a PPP format with the private investments coming in, the government, the regulatory framework. So those have to increase, and more InvITs are being seen. And to address ma'am's questions, that certain ministries are also coming in. We hope to see a climate fund being operationalized under the Housing and Urban Affairs, where the cities, at the city level, with multilateral funding, those at city level projects would also come in. So there would be opportunities for that. So I think we would like to create that pipeline of investment opportunities more, so that the financing can actually find an avenue to come in and maybe hopefully generate a positive return for the investors also.
I would just say that, as I mentioned about the credit guarantee instruments, so from the World Bank side perhaps, we would like to see more of these innovative infrastructure finance instruments, whether it is blended finance, subordinate debts, credit guarantees. So I think that's perhaps one of the ways to really leverage financing to meet the gap which exists today in terms of financing clean energy.
I would say scale and consistency. So you look at institutions like SECI, which have done a fantastic job. But I mean, India is a growing economy. It needs 45 to 50 gigawatts of solar and wind just to meet demand growth. Forgetting about carbon or green hydrogen or electric vehicles, just for demand growth. So I'd love to see SECI say, you know what, we're going to be doing 3,000 megawatt solar tender every month on the first of every month for the next 5 years. And then that would give the kind of the consistency and the assurance that people can say, I'm going to invest my money, and I know there's going to be projects coming down the pipeline.
So for my side, we are seeing one of the most rapid phase of energy transition. So now what we need is to think beyond our conventional style of financing. So we need to bring pace in that also. We need to make it easy for the developers, for the MSMEs or the smaller developers also to be able to get financing. So all these partial guarantee schemes should be coupled with a fast execution plans also from the final disbursements. And the other thing is that what we have seen in past is that all financing is being routed to a larger wind or solar or hybrid platforms. But there are multiple technology startups in the clean tech space, which are more into they are not into their start of their business. So they need more of a life cycle financing, either term loan or a mesh debt or a structured loan, which will help, which is more of they need more debt, not equity. So some sort of thought process from the development banks or the institution should go towards that financing, so either through AIF mode or some grant funding mode.
Again, relooking the way we finance for distributed solutions, including speed of transaction, but without compromising on quality. So it should never be something like less than so much size, you do not need to do an inspection, because that is setting up this whole system for failure, which is then going to make financing for future projects very, very difficult. And secondly, you need policies and regulations that back distributed financing, which means you need policies and regulations that make distributed generation and distributed solar possible.
Excellent. Thank you so much. A big round of applause to the panelists. I think it is self-explanatory in terms of there is no need for summing up this session. The experiences from different panelists you got, and if you have any questions, maybe we are off the panel and you can please engage with us for any questions and interactions. Thank you so much once again for a patient here.